Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of H H Holmes, known as America's very first serial killer. This guy is beyond. He even had a freaking murder castle. Okay, let's go. Sin and Tonic! Holmes was actually born Herman Webster Mudgett or Mudgett, Lex Mudgett, you pick, and is believed to have been born in the May of 1861. Yes, this is an old case, an oldie but a goodie. I learnt a new word when researching this case, and I love it. It is swindler. So he was known as a con man, con artist, also a swindler. Isn't that a brilliant word? Oh, you swindler. I love that. New word for the vocab. I'm just going to call him Holmes because that is what he named himself, among other things, later on. And in this story, we shall call him Holmes. He was born to an affluent family. They came from a farming background. That felt like a tiny spider. That was me checking for the spider. His father was Levi Mudgett, I'm going to say, and his mother was Theodate Price. I quite like that, Theodate. And Holmes was the middle child out of 5. They had lots of kids back in the day, didn't they? That's probably not even that much. It was said that Holmes was raised in a fairly strict religious family household, and that his upbringing was as such, and also that his father was fairly strict. However, this was 1861. Well, that's when he was born, so the 1860s. And that's a very long time ago. Everyone was probably very strict by our standards. And most people were probably quite religious. So take it with a pinch of salt. It sounds like there was nothing much to write home about his home life and that it was fairly normal for that time. However, there were some things about Holmes as a child that were not normal, such as his interest in dissecting and killing small animals, and possibly worse. Naughty boy. Obviously, that's a very big red flag nowadays. Serial killer, often associated with harming small animals when they are young in their childhood. So nowadays, it'd be like red flag. Holmes. He was a very, very intelligent boy, really, really smart, way above his peers. However, he was incredibly picked on as a child. He had, I think what you would call it is a wandering eye. I don't know if that's the right term actually, because to me, now I've said it, I'm thinking wandering eye is normally like a man that's always looking at the ladies, isn't it? But anyway, he had one eye that would be as it should, and the other eye would sort of wander off. That's why I'm thinking wandering eye, but it probably has got a proper name. And so he was incredibly picked on for that. Cruel kids. It was said that Holmes had a crippling fear of the doctor's office. No one knows why. I'm thinking maybe because of his eye and he had to go to the doctors quite a lot and he hated it. I don't know. That is purely speculation. Maybe they just left the eye alone. Who knows? But he had this crippling fear. And a group of they're not friends, are they? Children forced him into an empty doctor's office, and in that office was a human skeleton, and he was petrified. However, this might be where his passion ignited for human anatomy and medicine, because he would say that while he was in that office, completely paralysed with fear, the longer he was in there, the more he actually studied the skeleton and became intrigued by it. And this, in turn, led to him becoming fascinated with the human body, anatomy, chemistry, and medicine. So I'm not going to say that those boys did him a favour. No, because we haven't heard the rest of this terrifying story. But they cured his fear of the doctor's office. Let's just put it that way. It was also said that one day Holmes was out with a friend called Tom, and they were doing what boys do and just exploring around, and they went to an abandoned building, like a factory building, from what I could read. And super sadly and suspiciously, Tom would fall in this building to his death. And he was with Holmes. They were children at the time, and it was thought that it was just a terrible accident. It was only later on, when Holmes became an adult and did what he did, that people then questioned whether Holmes may have pushed poor Tom to his death. But we will never know. Grim. At around the age of 16, 17, Holmes would marry his first wife, Clara, and 2 years after that they would have their son Robert. In 1882, Holmes would attend the University of Michigan and study medicine. And this is where, I'm not even going to say it gets spicy because, well, hold on to your hats, it keeps getting spicy. But this is where it gets interesting. At the university, he would end up working as sort of an apprentice for the chief professor of human anatomy. And he would begin stealing the cadavers, or some of them, not all of them. So that is a dead body. Yeah. And very, very naughty. You're not allowed to steal those. No. Holmes was one of these. I've covered cases like this before. They're smart, and they can really think up a plan, but they put so much energy and effort into these highly illegal cons, and just there's obviously a very specific type of person that's just like, this is the path they're going to take, rather than put all of their brains and their mind into legitimate hard work and gaining, I don't know. They're naughty, and they think a lot of themselves, and they don't want to go down the traditional paths. They want to outsmart the system, it seems. Holmes would take these cadavers home. He would then file fake insurance policies for these dead bodies, and then he would produce those bodies to the insurance company and say, this is so-and-so, oh, sadly they have died, and then he would be the main beneficiary on the insurance policies, and he would collect all their money from the insurance policies. Okay, so naughty. Again, it was in the 1800s, so they didn't have fingerprint things, or so Holmes would have to really disfigure the bodies of these cadavers so that they were unrecognisable. So he could be like, oh yeah, this is Julie, or this is John, on the insurance claims. And what they would do is they would take measurements of people. So people would have their measurements, they would be kept, and then they would measure the bodies of these disfigured people to see if they matched up with the claim. He would get away with it for quite a long time. He graduated in 1884, and at this point he was 24 years old. And this is when he changed his name from Herbert Webster Mudgett to Henry Howard Holmes. Probably, just speculation, but to avoid detection, because he'd been making a lot of life insurance claims and benefiting as Herbert Webster. Holmes would go on to have hundreds of aliases in his lifetime. Hundreds. It was crazy. Absolutely bonkers. But this guy, he really was a swindler. So he would need to avoid getting caught, I suppose, by using different aliases. At around the same time that Holmes graduated from university, Clara would leave and take their son with her. Now, some people said that it was because he was just really not very nice to Clara, and she just had enough. She let bay. And they never officially divorced. And the cheeky what's-it, he would go on to marry at least 2 other women. I think it's at least 2. Never ever divorcing the person before. A word? That's illegal, and that was illegal then as well. So I forget the word for that. I don't want to guess, because I might be horrifically wrong with the word, and it might mean something really worse. So yeah, so he did that, and it was illegal at the time as well. Holmes was a very, very charming man. This was obviously quite a crucial trait if you're a swindler, con man. You need to be quite charming. It probably doesn't work very well if you're not. you've got to have the gift of the gab, haven't you? You've got to sell yourself and you've got to be confident and sure. And this attracted lots of ladies. So even though he wasn't particularly wildly good looking and handsome, he didn't have a problem with the ladies. Oh no, I've been bitten. With Clara and his son off, he decided to travel around the country. He would go from job to job, state to state, name to name, probably woman to woman, con to con, until 1886, and this is where he settled in Chicago. He found a drugstore owned by somebody called Elizabeth S. Holton and her husband, and he would get a job here as a pharmacist. He worked hard, he was charming, customers loved him, Elizabeth and her husband really loved him as well. He also met a woman at this time in Chicago called Myrta. They went on to marry, illegally, I might add, and I think they went on to have a daughter called Lucy. After a time, Holmes offered to buy the pharmacy and the land that it was on from the Holtons, and they agreed. At the same time, he also purchased a plot of land across the road from the pharmacy, a big plot of land. I don't really know. I don't know if this is correct. I'll share a picture of it, but I think what I read was it was like a block long. I think that's big. I don't know. We don't have blocks here. But I'm assuming, and from looking at it, it's big. So like a big, large plot of land across the road from the pharmacy. This is where he planned to build a very large hotel, and work would soon begin. Locals would soon come to call it the castle. So at first it's called just the castle. It was huge. The ground floor of the castle would house a bunch of shops. So there was a barber's, a jeweller's. He moved the drug store into the castle as well, into the ground floor. So it was a parade of shops along the bottom of the castle. The first floor again would seem relatively normal, not much going on, but it did have the reception desk for the hotel, which was to be on that floor and the second floor above it. There was a basement. We'll talk about the basement later. And the second and the third floor of this building were frickin' crazy. Holmes designed this hotel, castle, whatever you want to call it, himself. He was very, very guarded with the blueprints for this building, and he was really crafty and really clever because he was going to use this as a place of torture and murder and deceit and general just nastiness. He didn't want anyone, any soul on this planet to know the configuration of this building, only himself. So in the building process, he would hire some builders. They would be given a portion of the blueprints to build a certain amount of the castle, and then he would fire them for no real reason once they had finished the job. Sometimes, because he's a con man, remember, he would state that they had broken the rules of their contract and things like that, so he wouldn't even pay the builders for what they had done. Cheeky. When really they had probably done nothing wrong and just built, whatever. So yeah, but no one ever got the full blueprint of his hotel. This was his weird and wonderful creation that only he knew 100% about. Sorry if I keep scratching here. I've been bitten. Can you see? It really hurts. Like literally, I think in here. Thank you. The third floor was never really properly finished. The third floor ended up being his office, if you like, huge office apartment for Holmes. And also he had some other craftiness going on. I don't fully understand and know what this is, but he would buy mortgaged goods. So I don't know if that's like pawn shop sort of things. I don't know. So mortgaged goods, I should look it up. And then he would sell them on at the real price. And I think that was illegal, So he'd buy these items at a very low price because they were mortgaged. I wish I knew what that was. And then he would sell them on at full price. And at the end of the day, it was naughty. So a lot of the third floor, the top floor, would be used to house his naughty furniture, basically. The whole place was batshit crazy. Let's be real. The blueprints had 51 doors that opened onto brick walls, so fake doors, 100 windowless rooms, so it probably stinks as well. Staircases, loads of them, that led to absolutely nowhere. It's freaky, isn't it? Like, it's scary, actually. Most of the rooms were soundproof. In general, the whole second floor was just built as a maze. So it was built to disorientate people and confuse people. And there's only one real reason that you would do that, and that's if you didn't want somebody to escape and you wanted to just scare the living life out of them. So lovely. The second floor alone had 35 rooms, and there were corridors as well that led to nowhere. So staircases that lead to nowhere, corridors that lead to nowhere. Corridors? Yeah, that's right. I felt like I'd said it wrong. Trust yourself. And doors that opened onto nothing. It's just, it does set it. It gives you the shivers, doesn't it? Ooh. Hinged walls. Do you like this? The hinged wall. I've scared myself. Whoa. And it's getting dark. Well done, Soph. And weird cubby hole spaces. I don't know how else to describe that, but just like little compartments in the floors or in the walls. Not very big. So I have a theory that that could be to hide goods as well, because if he was doing naughty things like that, you know, hide some of these pieces of furniture that he's not meant to have. I don't know. But also most of them are kind of body-sized. He also had an alarm system for the second floor, because this is where all the crazy stuff is, okay? The second floor is the crazy stuff. We haven't even got to the real crazy stuff yet, but that is crazy. So this is where he gets crazy. So the second floor is alarmed, and a buzzer would go off. So on the second floor, in his office, apartment up in the third floor, or down in the basement. So if he was up to anything that he shouldn't be, and he was a lot, he would be notified. So he could, and this is what I mean about the little cubby holes. So if he was doing something he shouldn't be with someone, or furniture, but I think more likely someone, he could shove them into a cubby hole. And that's just scary as hell, isn't it? Shall we move on to the more horrific parts of the castle? Shall we? Grab a gin, like I say. Oh, I need to do a big long blink. Most of the rooms were soundproofed, and there's only one or two reasons that you can think of that, isn't there? I'm very tired. I have children that won't let me sleep at the moment. It's not my favourite. Most rooms on the second floor were designed to murder somebody, all in different ways. Shall we hear about some of those ways? I have a list. Here we are. There was a hanging chamber. Pleasant. Oh, an acid chamber. Yum. There was a small room with only one entrance, and that was from a trapdoor above. So you would be dropped in and left to starve to death. It's like, what's worse? There was a vault for suffocation. So it was a very, very small room with a big, heavy vaulted door. Once that was shut, you would very, very quickly use all of the oxygen in this very small room, and then you would suffocate to death. But a favourite of Holmes was most of the rooms all had like a gas line to them. So if he fancied, he would just gas people to death. Crazy man. And the fact that the whole place is built all like higgledy-piggledy, the reason I find that so terrifying is that it kind of suggests that he had a bit of fun with these people. Almost cat and mouse. Let them out, let them see if they can get out, and then shove them in somewhere and let them die slowly. A lot of the methods of murder were slow and just grim. It's just like twisted horror film stuff, isn't it? This one's innovative. A whole room covered in iron plates, probably not very big, and behind each plate was a blowtorch, right? So turn them on, and then very quickly that room just becomes basically an oven. Basement time. On the second floor, there were a number of chutes that would go from the second floor straight down into the basement. And this is where he would dispose of the bodies in a roundabout fashion. The basement had its own crematorium. It also had a big, large dissecting table, and the basement was huge, by the way. So it was a big old basement of doom. It could only be accessed via a trapdoor in a bathroom. So you had the chutes that you could put the bodies down, but then only access was through this trapdoor hidden in a bathroom. Very secret. If you made it into the basement and you were still alive, you would wish that you weren't, because it had huge vats of acid. And also, and I've always found this horrific, it's like medieval torture, one of those, like a rack, I think it's called, where he would tie your hands, I'm going to say it quick because it's gross, hands, feet, and then stretch you basically to death. Lovely. A common thing that he would do to get a bit of money would be to skin the bodies of his victims, remove the flesh and the muscle and everything, and clean the bones. And he would then create, ironically, because he was petrified, wasn't he, of the doctor's office, and it was a skeleton that piqued his interest in all of this crazy hair. Anyway, so he would create skeletons and sell them to medical facilities. That's what he would do. He'd make some money that way. Little did they know that he had murdered the skeleton in their office. Most of Holmes' victims were women that he would have working at his hotel. And again, the crafty son of a gun. He would employ vulnerable women, by the sounds of it, that needed the money, needed the work. He'd employ them, and he would say, as a stipulation of getting the job, they had to sign a life insurance policy. Don't do it. Don't do it. But they did. They needed the money, needed a job. So they would sign these life insurance policies, and then not long after that, they would vanish into thin air, or onto the second freaking floor, basically, and end up in the basement and end up in Dr. Jones's office. He would also lure people in from the streets, because there was, at the time, the World's Columbian Exhibition. It's like a big fair, and it was in town. So he would potter along down to the fair, and he would just spread the word, speak to mainly women, and say, oh, do you need a room for the night? I've got a hotel, it's down the road, blah, blah, blah. The hotel wasn't advertised because it wasn't a freaking hotel. He was murdering people in it. So he would go out himself to pick his victims. Also, weirdly, I don't know what's wrong with people, but he would chat people up. They'd be really charmed by him, people, I mean women. And then, sometimes he would even propose to them, and they're, oh yeah, and then they'd go back to the castle and get murdered. Don't know. That's very quick, isn't it? Propose within an hour. That seems legitimate, Susan. Does it? No. Back in the day, no phones, no bookon.com or whatever you call it, so they couldn't, it wasn't traceable. No one knew where their loved ones were, so they would just go missing. Just really sad. Oh, I just thought a lot of them ended up in medical, their skeletons and stuff ended up in medical offices and things. So ironic that he was scared of that, because then he put real dead murdered people, their skeletons, into doctors' offices. Oh, it's not right, Holmes. No. Sick revenge. Holmes' first named victim, because he got away with a hell of a lot of shit, was Julia Smith. She worked in one of the shops, at the bottom of the castle, the jewellers. She was married to Ned, and they had a 6-year-old daughter called Pearl. What a lovely name. I love that. Pearl. That was in Starlight Express. Answer me yes. I don't want you to go. Oh, God, I loved that. I'm sure one of the trains was called Pearl. Very quickly, Holmes and Julia, they started to have an affair. Naughty boy. He's just very naughty, isn't he? And Holmes, scoundrel, this is scandalous, he offered Julia and her husband, Ned, and their daughter a place at the hotel. Do you want to live in a room or an apartment, in the hotel? This was because he wanted Julia there all the time, obviously. But that's disgusting, isn't it? It wasn't long, obviously all living there, wasn't long before poor old Ned, he found out that Julia was having an affair with Holmes, and he got out of there. He was off ski. He left Julia, he left Pearl, and he was off. Shortly after this, Julia became pregnant. Oh dear. So Holmes has got Julia pregnant. Sounds like the baby was definitely unwanted, because Holmes offered to perform an abortion for Julia himself. He was like, I'll do it myself, I'm medically trained. And she was like, oh, okay, but only if you agree to marry me. Love. He was like, yeah, okay, no worries. How romantic. And so he performed the abortion, and we don't know whether there was a legitimate death, whether Julia did die on the table, again, back in the day, and that did happen, but probably not. She was never seen again, and neither was her 6-year-old daughter, Pearl. There were more women that would disappear and were then named victims of Holmes. He would employ somebody called Emily as a typist to work at the hotel, and she would vanish not long after she'd started. And somebody called Edna, and she started work at the hotel, and then quite quickly after that she also disappeared. Around this time, after he's murdered Julia and Pearl and these other 2 women, he then meets somebody called Minnie Williams. What a name. I love all the old-fashioned names, they're brilliant. He would call himself Henry Gordon, so Minnie knew him as Henry Gordon. I believe he met Minnie on his travels, because he would also travel round a lot. So they met, and she would move to Chicago to be with Holmes. Such charmer that she's like, I'm going to move there to be with you. He then offered her a job in his hotel, because that normally goes incredibly well, doesn't it? And somehow, and I will never understand this because I am such a sceptical person, and again, it was a long time ago, but somehow she was in love with him, and he convinced her to sign over the deeds. She owned a huge amount of land in Texas, and he convinced her to sign the deeds of the land over to a man that she didn't even know. Not him, not Henry Gordon, Holmes, but to somebody called Alexander Bond. How he managed to do that, I don't know. He must have fed her some intricate story, because you wouldn't just do that, would you? So he must have fed her this story. But she did. She signed over all of the deeds to her land to Andrew? Who's he? Someone else. Alexander Bond. Well, we know who Alexander Bond is. It's Holmes. It's one of his aliases. There was a catch though. There was a problem, because Minnie wasn't the sole beneficiary. She had a sister called Nanny, Minnie and Nanny. Once he had the deeds signed over to him from Minnie, he said, oh, I've got a lovely idea. Why don't you invite your sister Nanny over? Let's have her here. I'd love to get to know her, blah, 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 blah. So she did. When Nanny arrived, and I reckon, again, speculation, I reckon that Minnie was already a goner. But Nanny arrived at the hotel, and he would greet her, show her to her room, and then he would say, let's go and find Minnie. I'll take you to her room. So they walked through the weird and wonderful, wacky second floor, and he shoved her into the vaulted room. Once inside, he sealed it up, and she's thought to have suffocated to death. However, and this is grim, they found, later on, when they had a look around the castle, they found the skin from the sole of Nanny's foot, right, on the back of the vault door. So they think that there was acid spilt in the floor. Whether that was on purpose, because that's the sort of sick, twisted thing that he probably would do, like acid on the floor so that But anyway, the sole of her foot basically came off on the vault door. Mm-hmm. I read that Minnie was only a room or 2 away when her sister died, and then she disappeared. So perhaps she wasn't dead already, but in case something went wrong, maybe, I don't know. But very tragic. As you can imagine, this just can't keep going on forever and ever, because he is using aliases, he's used his own name an awful lot, and suspicion is raised. He was taking out all of these insurance policies on employees at the hotel, and that was flagged up. They were all blooming dying. You know, that's unusual, isn't it? Oh, he's like the unluckiest hotel owner in the world. So he buggered off to Texas. And now with Minnie and Nanny gone, he is the owner of this huge amount of land in Texas, isn't he? So that's where he's heading. On his travels to Texas, he met another wife, Georgiana. I love all these names, Georgiana. And they met in Colorado, and then she would go with him to Texas. Again, probably didn't know him very long. They settled down in Texas for a while, and he began planning his new murder castle that was going to sit nicely on his newly acquired land. July 1984. Holmes is arrested for the first time. Not for murder or anything nasty like that, no, but for the mortgaged good situation, so for selling on these mortgaged goods. He then had to do a stint in prison because that's fraud. And in prison, he met somebody called Marion Hedgepeth. Again, names, brilliant, love it. It's almost like it's a novel. Hedgepeth was in for robbing a train, and they would discuss a plan that would get them £10,000. Well, them, Holmes. That, as you can imagine, is a hell of a lot of money back then. Now, this plan would involve Holmes actually faking his own death. So not faking insurance claims for other people, but actually claiming that he himself had died. He would promise Hedgepeth $500. I think I said pounds before. We're in America, so it's dollars. He would promise Hedgepeth $500 if he could get him in touch with a corrupt lawyer, somebody that would work with him on this claim and, not say anything. Keep it stum. Hedgepeth, he pointed him in the right direction, and as soon as Holmes was out, he found this lawyer and they began discussing the plan. And the lawyer thought it was brilliant, it was foolproof, it was going to be fine. However, the insurance company were like, what? No. They had alarms going off all over the gaff here because his name had come up an awful lot. H H Holmes, the guy that's handed in all of these life insurance policies at his hotel, and all these people have died, and, they were already suspecting him. So very quickly, the lawyer was like, you can't do this. Like, they're going to ask so many questions. You are likely to get caught. So you can't do this one. Enter Benjamin Peitzel. Poor Benjamin. Benjamin Peitzel, he was Holmes' right-hand man. He was like his trusty sidekick, basically. He was known as a bit dumb. He was incredibly tall and strong, but he was a bit dim. And kind of like the polar opposite. I'm not sure what that sound was. The polar opposite of... Fuck, there's so many names. What's his name? Hedgepeth? No. Holmes. General help. Polar opposite of Holmes. Holmes was smaller, not as strong, but he was the brains of the operation. Peitzel was described as Holmes' tool, or his dog. So, yeah, not nice. He was really mistreated by Holmes. The new plan involved Benjamin Peitzel. Instead of Holmes faking his own death, Peitzel would do it. The £10,000 life insurance claim would then go to Peitzel's wife. They had 5 children, and Peitzel agreed to this plan because he said, I will do it, but you need to give me a bigger chunk. So £500 going to Hedgepeth. I don't know the figure, but he agreed with Holmes that he would get a larger chunk, and that would really help him and his family. So on his death, Mrs. Peitzel would receive the £10,000 insurance. Benjamin would go into hiding, and then Mrs. Peitzel would share the £10,000 with Holmes, and £500 would go to Hedgepeth. This was the plan. Peitzel would reinvent himself as an inventor called B.F. Perry. And he would go into his laboratory one day, and there would be an awful and horrific accident, leaving him mankily, horribly, and totally disfigured, as would have to be the case for the insurance scam. Holmes, his job, he was to find a cadaver that was exactly the same measurements as Peitzel, so that he could disfigure that cadaver. Peitzel could go into hiding, and he would say that this body was Peitzel. Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. It's all done. And this is where it gets spicy. Instead of faking the death of Peitzel, his only friend and confidant. He decided that it would be much nicer to have the whole 10 grand to himself. So he really did kill Peitzel off. How sad. How horrible. There was a reason behind this, and that was that Peitzel had begun to get cold feet. He had started to panic about if this went wrong, what the hell would happen to him, his family, terrible. He was very worried about that. He had 5 children and he didn't want anything to happen to them and to his wife and to him. So he was worried. Holmes knew that this could all go a bit tits up if he didn't step in. He got Peitzel really, really drunk. He then knocked him out with chloroform, and then the sicko, he burnt Peitzel alive. Got to pray and hope that the chloroform and the alcohol, he didn't even know. So that's what I hope. But what? Okay. It gets worse, I'm afraid. It gets a hell of a lot worse. His wife thought that everything had gone to plan. So off she tootles to identify, yes, the body of Peitzel, but it really freaking was. It wasn't a fake. She was like, oh, yeah, that's not him, that's fakey inside here. But, she's going along with the plan. So she thinks that dead, burnt, disfigured her body is not her husband, and it really freaking is. That's horrific. Holmes had told her that Peitzel was in London. He'd gone to London to hide in London. So she thought he was there. Oh, that's interesting. That comes up later. But remember London. Mrs. Peitzel, as was the plan, received the $10,000 in insurance money. And obviously, Holmes did not want to share. He wasn't very good at that, was he? So he came up with this elaborate plan, and it really was elaborate. He said that to avoid suspicion, because they were going to go and head to London to find Peitzel and reunite with Peitzel. Okay? Benjamin. So he said, right, we don't want to raise suspicion by literally getting that £10,000 and then buggering off together. They will get suspicious. Or would they? I don't know. But he said this. So he said, right, what we'll do is we'll split up. So I will take 3 of your children. Don't do it. He did it. He took 3 of her children, the middle 3 children. He took them. He said, we will go one route. You go another route. And we'll sort of weave our way to, somewhere to get to London, right? This was the plan. Couldn't do it directly because it would raise suspicion, is what he said. So they couldn't just directly go to London. Holmes had Alice, Nellie and Howard, the 3 middle children, with him. And he would travel around. They went through America. They went into Canada as well. And quite often, Mrs. Peitzel and her eldest child and the youngest child, they would be very, very close. He'd given her a very similar route to his own, not far off, but just slightly different. So they were sometimes incredibly close to each other, but they didn't know it. I'm not sure what he planned to do with Mrs. Peitzel and the eldest and the youngest child, how he planned to tie that loose end. But very sadly, he did murder her 3 middle children. He would murder Howard first, and he gave him a massive overdose of prescription medication. He then chopped his body into pieces and cooked it on a stove or in a stove. They moved on to Canada, and in Canada he was in a property that he owned, and it was here that he forced the 2 girls, Alice and Nellie, into a very small box with just one hole in it, and then he put a pipe into that hole and he gassed the girls in this small box. He then went on to strip their bodies. He stripped them naked and then buried them in the basement of his property in Canada. Really incredibly sad. In all of the madness of this, he forgot to pay, or just never planned to pay, Hedgepeth. Do you remember the guy that found him, the corrupt lawyer? In prison? He didn't pay him. Well, he didn't take too kindly to that. So he would tell the police what the hell was going on. He didn't think he was going to get his 500 quid, and he just thought, I'm not going to let you get away with it. The police could not find Holmes, but they did find Mrs. Peitzel and her eldest daughter and her youngest. They then very sadly had to tell her the truth about Benjamin, and that was the body that she had actually identified when she'd gone to the police station. She was then in a state of complete panic because her 3 middle children were with this crazed man that had really killed her husband. She knew some information. She had some addresses of where Holmes may be, and the police went to find him, and they did, but they only found Holmes and his wife, Georgiana. None of the 3 children. How awful for Mrs. Peitzel. She's lost her husband and 3 of her children. Terrible. Holmes was arrested. They didn't have any evidence of his fraud and stuff like that. They didn't have any, but they did have an outstanding warrant for him for stealing a horse. And this was in Texas. When he'd been in Texas, he'd stolen a horse. Random. So they had Holmes. This is when they started their investigation into Holmes. They started looking into all of his properties. They very, very sadly found the bodies of Nellie and Alice in the basement of the property that he owned in Canada, and they'd also searched all the places that he'd stayed, and one of which was the place where he'd murdered Howard, and they found one of Howard's teeth and some other things of his in the stove. And this is when they started searching the murder castle. Oh, whoa. Can you imagine? They interviewed his staff, and they would say that they were not allowed to go onto the 2nd floor. They were forbidden. It was never cleaned. They weren't allowed to go up there. Ooh, this was like, oh, let's get up on that 2nd floor, guys. On the 3rd floor, they found a large oven. Likes ovens and stuff. What's going on? And inside that oven, they found hair which belonged to Minnie, poor Minnie, and a gold chain of hers as well. Just awful discoveries all around the place. Scratch marks inside the vault where people were suffocated. It's awful. Also inside the vault was the foot skin of Nanny. The basement had the incinerator, and inside of that were just loads and loads of human bones. God knows how many victims there were. He would say he'd killed 27 people, but the number changed all of the time. He was very, very sneaky. He would never really say the real number, but it must have been a lot. They found bones that belonged to Pearl, the 6-year-old Pearl, in the basement. Very sad. And they found blood-stained women's clothes and things like that. It's just... Holmes admitted to the insurance fraud, but he would not admit to the murders. And the crafty one, he nearly got away with it. He said that Peitzel's body wasn't Peitzel, and that was also a cadaver. But the detective remembered that when they found Peitzel's body, it was in full rigor mortis, meaning that that person had died very recently. So no cadaver would be in full rigor mortis. So the inspector, the detective, he started questioning Holmes. Like, how did you work out how to put a body into rigor mortis? How did you do that? And Holmes just had literally no answer. He was scuppered. Holmes confessed to 27 murders, like I said. He was a bit of a shambles. He'd confessed to murders that he hadn't committed and give names of people that were still alive or that were dead but had died of natural causes. So he just... cat and mouse again, just like throwing misinformation into the mix, and just a pickle. Only 9 victims were ever really confirmed because they'd found parts of them, if you like. He was paid by reporters handsomely, or was going to be, for the story, his story. But he always discredited his own story by telling one person one thing, one person another thing, one person that... He just made a mockery of the whole thing. He was given the death penalty, and he was to be hanged on the 7th of May in 1896. This did not go to plan. When they work it out, don't they, the drop and everything, and it's meant to break your neck and be very quick and very humane, if you can say that, whatever. So that's how it's meant to work, but it didn't work and it didn't break his neck. So he was there for like 15 or so minutes, just not pleasant, no thanks. It was all written about in papers. Lots and lots of people were there to watch it as well. Can you imagine just watching that? Like, that would put you off of your breakfast, lunch and dinner, wouldn't it? Ironically, he suffered a very slow death, as did many of his own victims. And, get this, right, considering he would steal cadavers and all of, right, and do all sorts to people's bodies once he'd murdered them, after he'd murdered them as well, he was incredibly worried that he would become victim to grave robbery and people would mess about with his bones and body after he'd died. Didn't like the idea of that. So he requested to be buried in cement and be buried 10 feet under. And he was. They agreed with that. So that's just weird, isn't it? And like, what? Hypocrite. In 1895, 2 years before he was hanged, the murder castle was, well, they tried to blow it up. We don't know who. 2 people were seen going in, and then 2 people were seen rushing out, and then boom, 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 lots of explosions. It didn't take the building down though. It just kind of ruined everything inside. There is a lot of speculation. Was that did Holmes ask people to do that if he was ever arrested? Whatever. Was it people trying to blow up the building because it was such a horrible place? No one knows, but it didn't succeed in toppling the building. That remained there for like 40 years after that. And then after about 40 years, it was ripped down. I wonder what it was used for. I must look that up, actually. I did mean to do that in my research and I forgot, but I'd like to know what it was used for. I wonder. I mean, what could it be used for? Maybe they kept the shops at the bottom because they're useful. Sadly, in 1914, a caretaker of the hotel who had worked there at the time of all of these murderous, horrible things, he took his own life. He was called Quinn, and his family would say he was haunted by what had happened there and he would have visions and things like that. I don't know if he ever saw anything. It's not great, is it? And it really upset him. And then he sadly took his own life. There is a twist in this tale. This is a big one, and I'm going to have to do a whole nother video. I'm going to have to do a little series of videos, I think, on this. I'm going to have to do Jack the Ripper. Yes, hold on to your hats, because I think this is fascinating. I'm also going to have to do possible Jack the Ripper, like, you know, who is it? But this got me right in there. Right, check this out. In 1888, Jack the Ripper caused havoc in London, didn't he? There were 11 eyewitnesses that saw Jack the Ripper, and they all made composite sketches and things. I will share a picture. This is uncanny and weird and freaky. Not only do they look incredibly like H H Holmes, like weirdly so, like crazy so, but also the MO of these 2 men, Jack the Ripper and H H Holmes. H H Holmes would disfigure his victims terribly, wouldn't he? And the victims of Jack the Ripper were always terribly disfigured. It made it look like they were sort of a hack job, but actually, whoever killed Jack the Ripper's victims, well, whoever Jack the Ripper was is what I mean, was medically trained. And H H Holmes was medically trained. Ooh, okay. Now there is a great something grandson of Holmes alive, a descendant. He has been so sure that Holmes is Jack the Ripper. So sure. He has really tried to prove this theory. There was also something else that happened where the descendant actually, ironically, ended up bringing Holmes's body up, so exhuming the body, Sophie, to prove that it was really Holmes, because there was a lot of speculation that Holmes had actually kind of slipped the net and convinced somebody else to be hung for him. I mean, who's going to do that? But when they did exhume the body, it was Holmes. It was proven to be Holmes from dental records and things like that. And remarkably, because he was encased in cement, this is fascinating, his moustache was preserved, perfectly preserved. His clothes were really good, like it had slowed down or almost kind of, you know, stopped the decomposition process from happening. How bizarre is that? And weird, but bizarre. I mean, bizarre and weird are the same word, Sophie. Really. What I mean is how bizarre and gross is what I meant. And how ironic that after all that business, that please put me in cement 10 feet under, his own freaking relatives are like, bring him up, let's fiddle about with his body. Do you know what I mean? I just found that ironic. Anyway, Jack the Ripper. This descendant that's brought the body up, he's so sure. He's convinced that Holmes was Jack the Ripper. He also has a letter. So he's got letters that Holmes had written to his lawyer back in the day. So he's got his handwriting right. In these letters, he talks about visiting London a couple of times. He also talks about going there because he's got a friend there, right? All of this, as I was reading this, I'm like, boom, boom. These letters, they were given to handwriting experts because there was a Dear Boss letter that was written by Jack the Ripper. Bear with me because I haven't done my research on Jack the Ripper properly yet. But there was this letter that is thought to be written by Jack the Ripper. and they put that letter and Holmes' letters to his lawyer to this handwriting specialist, and they said it was a 97% match. And apparently you can't get a 100% match. Like, even your own writing, if you wrote two things, they would be slightly different, 98, 99%. So 97% is crazy, isn't it? The 1888 murders in London, Ripper's victims, happened in a very short space of time, and then they just suddenly ended. They just suddenly stopped. Why would that happen? Like, normally if a serial killer is on a roll and they are not getting caught, they just carry on. So that's bizarre. Did H H Holmes commit the Jack the Ripper murders? Was he Jack the Ripper? And did he then, after having this spate of murders, return to America? Therefore, that's why the murders stopped. Oh my God. Also, there was a paper trail kept. When they were investigating Holmes, they went through all of his papers and things like that, but the trail of his paperwork went mysteriously quiet between 1888 and 1889, and people that believe he is Jack the Ripper believe that that's because he wasn't in America, he wasn't in the States, therefore he had no paper trail going on because he was in London being Jack the Ripper. Oh my God, guys, seriously, this got me. I cannot wait to research that, but I just think I need a slight break from it because otherwise it gets all clogged up in the brain. However, we do have to balance it out, because what would be the motive? Because back home, Holmes's motive for all of his killings is money, it's greed. He's taken out life insurance policies. He's doing all of this for a purpose. It's all for money. It never seems like he killed for killing's sake. You could argue, though, for a man to go to the lengths that he did to create a murder castle, he's got to be he's got to take some pleasure out of the actual killing process. So, okay. But yes, most of his murders, most of them were for money. The murders that were committed in London, the Ripper murders, they would seem to have been committed out of rage, hatred towards women, something more along those lines, it would seem. So perhaps the two don't match up, although I find the handwriting, it's just fascinating. Oh, and when they looked at the letters, the Dear Boss letter, Holmes's letter, when they looked at the Dear Boss letter, they did think that perhaps, because of the language used, that the writer was actually American. So, can't wait to delve into that one a bit more deeply. So I feel like I need to do Jack the Ripper and then all the possibilities of who the guy could have been. So we will do that. Because this one's quite a big case and lots of bits to it, I've struggled getting my head around it. Sometimes you like to have a clear picture, well, I do, like to have a clear, oh yeah, this is what I think. And even if no one else agrees, it doesn't matter, you've got it sorted in your mind. For me in this one, when I read more about the Jack the Ripper stuff, it did make me realise that basically Holmes saw himself as a clever, cunning swindler, and that the murders that he committed were for money's sake. The only thing that feels at odds with that is the elaborate murder castle and all of these weird and wonderful and wacky ways in which he would kill people, because that seems a little bit more, that's like his sadistic side coming out, isn't it? He didn't just bop someone on the head, ooh, life insurance. No, there was these extreme lengths. Maybe that just suggests that he really thought highly of himself and he challenged himself. I don't know. That concludes today's story of H H Holmes and his weird and wacky murder castle. Thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of Sin and Tonic. Cheers. I hope you can join me next week for another true crime story and a glass or a jar or a vase or a mug of gin. Oh, I bought it. I bought it up. Here we are. It's fabulous. Look at it. You turn it on. It can do that. It can do all sorts of this. It can do this. Ooh, it can be tall. See? Or it can go this way, be a bit shorter. It's quite effective. I think it goes even harder. Wait. Whoa! Oh my gosh! fabulous. But it's because I brought it up to the shed. It of course is freezing freaking cold. It's not freezing cold. It's actually pleasant. Can you believe it? It's actually just perfect. Oh my god. I think it's, what's it, 20 something. That's not right, but it's very, very nice in here. I've enjoyed myself. So the fan will be a beautiful, I'm just dripping all over myself here. It will be beautiful when it's warm. When it's cold, I've got my coals that I can place on and blankets and things. Yeah, I quite like the shed. Not gonna lie, I have become accustomed to it. I've got a really good setup. I'm comfortable, I'm secure, it's cosy. It's mostly an okay temperature. Don't get me wrong, even in the house, I struggle with temperature. I do. So I'm just going to moan wherever I am. So why not moan where everything else is actually okay? Do you know what I mean? I'm not sure. Anyway, waffles. Thank you so much for joining me. Love ya. Bye. Okie dokes.